She was born into faith, raised in a world where God was supposed to be the foundation of everything. Her father, Bishop Elijah Caldwell, wasn't just a preacher, he was a leader, a man whose voice commanded rooms filled with thousands. New Life Christian Center wasn't just a church, it was a beacon for the Black community in Atlanta. Families came there to heal, to find guidance, to believe that no matter how broken the world outside might be, within those walls, there was peace. Jasmine Caldwell grew up in the front pews, hands lifted in worship, her father's sermons echoing through the vaulted ceilings. From the outside, she had everything: privilege, love, security. She was the bishop's daughter, and that meant something. It meant eyes were always on her. It meant expectations followed her every step. It meant she had to be perfect. But perfection is a moving target. And in a world where beauty is currency, where the lines between self-worth and social media validation are blurred, where Black women are told their bodies are never enough unless they fit a certain mold, Jasmine found herself chasing something she could never quite grasp. She had always been beautiful. That's what people told her. But beautiful wasn't enough. Not when the world around her was shifting. Not when the images on her phone, hour after hour, day after day, showed a different kind of beauty. Fuller curves. Cinched waists. A shape that didn't just turn heads but commanded attention. It wasn't just celebrities anymore. It was women she knew. Friends. Influencers she followed. Women with lives that seemed effortless, glamorous, untouchable. They weren't just admired, they were adored. And they all had one thing in common. The BBL. Jasmine had always been proud of her body, or at least she tried to be. She worked out. She ate clean. She followed the trends, dressed the part, played the role. But no matter how many squats she did, no matter how much she maintained the image of the healthy church girl, it wasn't enough. The comments under her pictures told her so. The comparisons made it clear. Pretty, but she's built like a track star. Face card never declines, but she needs some hips. She's cute, but imagine her with a little more weight in the right places. She laughed it off in public. Smiled, brushed it away, ignored the whispers that found their way into her DMs, into the conversations she overheard. But late at night, in the silence of her room, she saw it. The before and afters. The transformations. The glow-ups. And deep down, a voice she never wanted to acknowledge started whispering. If they can do it, why can't you? She told herself she was just curious. That's all it was. A Google search here. A saved Instagram post there. A passing thought when she saw another girl she knew show up with a new body, her confidence radiating through the screen. But curiosity has a way of turning into something else. And before she even realized what was happening, she was sitting in consultations. She was looking at payment plans. She was envisioning a version of herself that didn't just fit in but stood out. There was one problem. A BBL wasn't cheap. Not the real ones. Not the ones done by board-certified plastic surgeons in sterile operating rooms with safety measures in place. The kind she wanted, the kind that would change everything, cost thousands. Tens of thousands. And even though her father was a wealthy man, even though she came from a family that never struggled financially, she knew this wasn't something she could ask for. Because a pastor's daughter isn't supposed to want this. A pastor's daughter is supposed to be content, secure, happy in the body God gave her. So she kept it quiet. She told no one. And when she found a surgeon offering what she wanted for a fraction of the price, when she saw the testimonials, real women, real results, she convinced herself that this was the answer. She had no idea that the man holding the scalpel wasn't a surgeon at all. She had no idea that she was walking into a clinic that wasn't equipped to handle complications. She had no idea that once she laid down on that table, she would never get up again. How did Jasmine Caldwell, a woman with everything to live for, end up in the hands of an uncertified doctor? Why are so many young women making the same decision? And who is really to blame? Tonight, we uncover the truth. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Let's make sure this never happens again. Atlanta, Georgia. July 14, 2023. It was an ordinary summer morning, the kind where the air clung heavy to the city, thick with humidity. The streets were alive with movement, commuters heading to work, children playing on sidewalks, the pulse of the city steady and unwavering. At exactly 11 a.m., Jasmine Caldwell pulled into the parking lot of a small medical office on the outskirts of town. From the outside, the building was unremarkable, just another beige structure tucked between a laundromat and a tax service. There was no grand entrance, no polished reception area like the high-end clinics she had seen on Instagram. But none of that mattered. This was it. The day she had been waiting for. She had spent months researching, comparing, contemplating. Late nights scrolling through endless before and after pictures. Whispered conversations with friends who had already gone through it. Long looks in the mirror, wondering if she would ever truly feel good enough in her own skin. Jasmine had everything, at least, that's what people believed. She was the daughter of Bishop Elijah Caldwell, one of Atlanta's most respected religious leaders. New Life Christian Center wasn't just a church, it was an empire. With a congregation of over 10,000 members, her father's sermons reached far beyond the pulpit, spilling into television broadcasts, social media, and community outreach programs. He spoke of faith, of self-worth, of embracing God's design. Jasmine had heard those words her entire life. She had lived them, breathed them. But no scripture, no sermon, no choir melody could silence the voice inside her that told her she wasn't enough. She had spent her childhood in the front row, the perfect pastor's daughter. But as she got older, as she stepped into her own identity, she felt the pressure mounting. The expectation to be flawless, to embody grace and virtue, to be the kind of woman people looked up to. The kind who didn't need validation. But social media told her otherwise. It was the world she lived in, the endless stream of perfectly sculpted bodies, the influencers flaunting their hourglass shapes, the women who weren't just admired but worshipped. She saw how people reacted to them. The way men fawned over them, the way brands threw money at them, the way they carried themselves with an effortless confidence. She wanted that. Her best friend, Kendra Evans, had tried to talk her out of it. "Jazz, you don't need this." "I know, but I want it." "You don't even know if this dude is legit. He's done so many procedures. You saw the pictures. Everybody loves their results." "I don't care about the pictures. I care about you." Kendra knew the dangers. She had seen the horror stories. Women going in for a cheap fix and coming out either disfigured or dead. But Jasmine wasn't hearing it. She had already made up her mind. And so, on that Friday morning, she walked through those doors alone. The clinic wasn't officially registered as a surgical center. It wasn't inside a hospital. There was no team of trained anesthesiologists, no emergency equipment, no oversight. And the man waiting for her in that office, the one who had promised to give her the body she dreamed of, wasn't a doctor. His name was Terrence T. Davis. He had never been to medical school. Never completed a surgical residency. His credentials didn't exist. What he had was a reputation. A carefully crafted illusion, spread through word of mouth and Instagram DMs. He knew the right language to use, the right testimonials to post, the right amount of reassurance to give to women like Jasmine, young, impressionable, eager for change. He had been performing these surgeries for years, right under the radar. No formal training, no legal certification, just a stolen white coat and a steady hand. And Jasmine? She had no idea. She had heard whispers, of course. Stories of girls who had complications, of procedures that didn't go as planned. But fear had a way of losing its grip when desire outweighed logic. She didn't want to be scared. She wanted to be beautiful. She had spent the night before recording a video for her followers, smiling into the camera, telling them she had a self-care weekend planned. She sent one last text to Kendra. "Girl, I just wanna look snatched." And then she put her phone on silent. She was ready. Ready for the body she had always dreamed of. Ready to step into a new version of herself. She would never step out of that clinic again. The door closed behind her, sealing her off from the outside world. The waiting room was smaller than she expected. No front desk, no receptionist typing away at a computer. Just a few metal chairs, a scratched-up coffee table, and an air conditioning unit that rattled every few seconds. There were no medical degrees hanging on the walls. Just a cheaply printed flyer taped to the glass window, listing the procedures available. BBL special, $3,500, limited time only. Lipo package deal, $4,200, no waitlist. Payment plans available. Jasmine glanced around. There were other women sitting there, scrolling on their phones, waiting for their turn. They looked like her, young, stylish, eager. No one spoke. The silence felt heavy, like an unspoken understanding between them. She had paid her deposit in cash a week ago. No receipts. No paperwork. Just a promise through a DM, "We got you, sis. You'll be snatched." At exactly 11:10 a.m., a woman stepped out from behind a curtain. "Jasmine?" She looked up. The woman was not dressed like a nurse. No scrubs, no ID badge, just tight jeans, a tank top, and latex gloves that looked too big for her hands. Jasmine hesitated. Something about this felt off. But before she could process it, the woman smiled. "He's ready for you." Jasmine followed her down a narrow hallway. The walls were dingy, the overhead light flickering slightly. The room she was led into wasn't what she had imagined. No hospital bed. No monitors. No sterile trays lined with precision tools. Just a metal table with a thin mattress, a rolling cart stacked with bottles of unknown liquids, and a single overhead light. And then he walked in. Dr. T. Terrence Davis was tall, broad, with the charm of a man who had learned how to sell himself. He wasn't wearing a lab coat, just a black t-shirt and joggers, as if he had just stepped out of a gym. He wasn't what she expected a surgeon to look like, but he greeted her with confidence, his smile easy, his voice smooth. "Jasmine, right? You ready for this?" She nodded, though her hands felt clammy. "Ain't nothing to be nervous about. We do this all the time. You're in good hands, I promise." She wanted to believe him. She had seen the results. The Instagram posts. The before and after photos. The glowing reviews. She had told herself over and over that she wasn't the first, that she wouldn't be the last. This was routine. So why did she feel so uneasy? "Lay down for me," he said. She climbed onto the table, her heartbeat suddenly too loud in her ears. The assistant came over with a needle, already prepped. There was no explanation of what was in it, no discussion of anesthesia risks, no consent forms. Just a little something to relax you. The last thing she remembered was the ceiling spinning. Then everything went dark. By 11:45 a.m., Jasmine was unconscious. Dr. T worked quickly, too quickly. There was no anesthesiologist monitoring her vitals, no team standing by in case something went wrong. The room wasn't sterile. The instruments hadn't been properly sanitized. But this wasn't new to him. He had done hundreds of these procedures, back to back, day after day, sometimes operating on 5 women in a single night. What Jasmine didn't know was that this clinic had been reported before. Women had left with severe infections, nerve damage, internal bleeding. Some had been rushed to emergency rooms after their wounds reopened in the middle of the night. But no one spoke publicly. No lawsuits. No arrests. Because in this world, there was a code of silence. Women who went to underground surgeons weren't supposed to talk. If something went wrong, it was their own risk to take. And Dr. T. He knew that. He knew that fear kept people quiet. And that's why, despite multiple complaints, despite women posting horror stories in private Facebook groups, he was still here. Still in business. Still holding the scalpel. And now, Jasmine Caldwell was on his table. By 12:30 p.m., something wasn't right. Jasmine's breathing had slowed. Her oxygen levels were dropping. The assistant noticed first. "She don't look good." Dr. T barely glanced up. "She's fine. It's normal." But it wasn't normal. Her skin was losing color. Her chest was rising and falling too slowly. Then, suddenly, she seized. Her body jerked violently, her arms twitching uncontrollably. The assistant panicked. "She's shaking. Something's wrong." Dr. T froze. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had seen complications before, but not like this. He grabbed the syringe. Tried to inject something to bring her back. It didn't work. Jasmine's body went limp. Her lips turned blue. And at 12:46 p.m., her heart stopped beating. For the first time in his career, Dr. T didn't know what to do. Because there was no emergency protocol. No one to call. No way to undo what had just happened. For a few moments, no one spoke. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of the overhead light buzzing. Then, the assistant broke the silence. "She's dead." Dr. T's face was unreadable. He stepped back, ran a hand down his face, and then did the only thing he knew how to do. "Get her out of here." The assistant's breath hitched. "What? We gotta call somebody." "No." His voice was sharp. "Final. Wrap her up. Put her in the car. Drop her at the ER. They'll think she died somewhere else." The assistant hesitated. This was too far. This wasn't just another botched surgery. This was a body. "Do it," he snapped. "Now." And just like that, Jasmine Caldwell, the daughter of a bishop, the woman who only wanted to feel beautiful, was treated like nothing more than an inconvenience. By 1:15 p.m., her lifeless body was loaded into the back seat of a black SUV. By 1:45 p.m., she was dumped outside Grady Memorial Hospital's emergency entrance, her pulse long gone, her skin already cold. And by 3:10 p.m., a doctor pronounced her dead. There was no next chapter for Jasmine. No new body to show off. No transformation waiting on the other side. She had walked into that clinic thinking she would walk out a new woman. She never walked out at all. What was supposed to be a 2-hour procedure had turned into a nightmare. They searched her pockets. No ID. Her face was familiar, someone had seen her before, but they couldn't place her. It wasn't until an off-duty nurse recognized her from social media that the hospital learned the truth. "This girl, she's Bishop Caldwell's daughter." And just like that, the story exploded. The autopsy report came 2 days later. The cause of death, fat embolism. Fat had been injected incorrectly into her bloodstream. It traveled to her lungs, blocking the oxygen supply, causing her heart to stop. It was a mistake that no trained surgeon would have made. A mistake that happened and an unqualified man picked up a scalpel and played doctor. And then, the bombshell dropped. Dr. Terrence T. Davis wasn't a doctor at all. No medical degree. No certifications. His entire career was built on fraud. He was a former strip club promoter, a man who had never stepped foot in a medical school classroom. For years, he had been running an illegal operation, luring women in with promises of perfect bodies at half the cost. And Jasmine Caldwell had paid the price with her life. As the news broke, more women came forward. More victims. More stories of botched procedures, infections, permanent damage. Some had barely survived. Others were never heard from again. And now, Dr. T was on the run. By the time authorities arrived at the clinic, he was gone. No sign of him. No trace. Just an empty surgical room, still stained with Jasmine's blood. What started as a dream ended as a tragedy. And the man responsible? He had vanished into thin air. The news spread like wildfire. A pastor's daughter. A botched surgery. A fake doctor on the run. The headlines were relentless. Bishop's daughter left to die after underground surgery. Atlanta woman dumped outside hospital, authorities say it's part of a larger epidemic. Cosmetic surgery nightmare, the dark world of illegal procedures. Jasmine's face was everywhere now. But she wasn't alive to see it. For years, Dr. Terrence T. Davis had operated in the shadows, working from unlicensed clinics, preying on women who were searching for perfection. Women just like Jasmine. Women who had been convinced that their natural bodies weren't enough. And now, the truth was unraveling. More victims came forward. Some had barely survived. Some had never fully recovered. Some had told their stories before, but no one listened. Until now. 2 days after Jasmine's death, her father stood before his congregation, his voice heavy with grief. Bishop Elijah Caldwell had built his life on faith, on believing that God had a plan for everything. But there was no scripture, no verse, no sermon that could bring his daughter back. She was gone. Taken from him, not by disease, not by an accident, but by a man who never should have touched a scalpel. At Jasmine's funeral, thousands gathered. The church was packed, people standing shoulder to shoulder, filling the aisles, the hallways, the streets outside. Her casket sat at the front, draped in white roses, surrounded by the faces of family, friends, and strangers who had come to mourn a woman they would never get to know. And then, Bishop Caldwell stepped up to the pulpit. His hands trembled. His voice broke. My daughter was perfect the way God made her, but the world told her otherwise. Silence. A silence so thick it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. She didn't need to change herself. She didn't need to be anything but who she was. But this world convinced her that she wasn't enough. A mother in the front row clutched her daughter's hand. A woman in the back wiped her tears. A young girl, no older than 12, looked down at her own body, wondering if she would ever feel like she was enough. Bishop Caldwell's voice rose with pain, with fury, with the weight of every parent who has ever lost a child to something they could not protect them from. This is bigger than my daughter. This is bigger than this one man. How many more? How many more young women have to die before something changes? Before we hold these people accountable, our lives for a version of beauty that wasn't even real. And Bishop Caldwell wasn't going to let his daughter's death be just another headline. Dr. T was charged with manslaughter, practicing medicine without a license, fraud, and reckless endangerment. He faced up to 25 years in prison. But the damage was already done. Jasmine wasn't the first to die from an illegal procedure. She wouldn't be the last. And that was the real question. How many more women were out there right now, scrolling through Instagram, looking at those before and after photos, considering taking the same risk that had cost Jasmine her life? How many more clinics like this existed, hidden in plain sight, operating under fake names, luring in new victims every day? And why, after years of complaints, years of warnings, years of women suffering, had no one shut them down sooner? Who was really to blame? Dr. T? Or a society that told Jasmine she wasn't enough in the first place? And as long as that message still existed, how many more women would die chasing the same impossible dream? The funeral ended, the casket lowered, the cries of grief fading into the evening sky. But for every Jasmine that was buried, another girl was booking her first consultation. And the cycle continued. Jasmine Caldwell's story is not just one tragedy. It's part of a larger reality, one that continues to unfold every single day. Young women are being lured into the promise of perfection, told that their natural beauty isn't enough, convinced that they have to risk their own lives to meet an impossible standard. And the question remains, who is responsible? Is it the unlicensed surgeons who operate in the shadows, preying on those desperate for change? Or is it something deeper, a society that profits from women's insecurities, a culture that glorifies one body type while shaming another? Do you think Jasmine's death could have been prevented? Should social media be held accountable for promoting these dangerous beauty standards? And how many more women will it take before something truly changes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have this conversation. Let's demand answers. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, if you believe the truth should never be buried, hit that subscribe button. We expose what others won't. Because Jasmine's story should never happen again.